I shouldn't be saying this out loud. If you stop listening before the end, you'll think this is just another December story. But if you really stay, you'll understand why the message always ends the same way. It only works if you're listening. When I first heard that sentence, it sounded harmless. Almost polite. Now I know it wasn't a statement. It was a condition. The night it began, my phone vibrated at exactly 3:17 a.m. Not a notification. Not a call. Just a vibration. One long pulse. The kind that feels intentional. I remember thinking I must have imagined it. December does that to you. Cold nights stretch time. Silence becomes heavy. Your thoughts start echoing. I reached for the phone anyway. There was a voice memo waiting for me. No sender. No app history. No record of it downloading. Just, there. The waveform was flat for most of it. At first, I thought it was empty. Then I pressed play. I was listening to my own voice. Not a recording I recognized. Not a clip from a video. It wasn't frightened. It wasn't rushed. It sounded calm. Too calm. It said, "You're going to try to explain this away. Please don't. That's how it learns you." Then silence. 5 seconds later, the memo ended with a sentence I hadn't heard before. It only works if you're listening. I sat there for a long time, phone glowing in the dark, waiting for fear to arrive. It didn't. What I felt was worse. Familiarity. Because December had already been strange. I run a channel that narrates true horror stories. Stories people swear are real. I don't add monsters. I don't invent endings. I just read what's sent to me. Every December, submissions triple. Always have. I used to joke that winter makes people honest. Lonely people talk more in the dark. That explanation worked for years. This December, the stories started overlapping. Different senders. Different places. Same details. The same pauses. The same phrases that didn't belong. And buried inside them, like a watermark no one noticed at first, the same sentence kept appearing. It only works if you're listening. I edited those lines out in the beginning. They felt like creepypasta contamination. Someone copying someone else. Then one night, while reviewing raw audio, I heard something I hadn't edited. Breathing. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just, patient. I checked the mic levels. I checked the room tone. I replayed it again and again. The breathing wasn't synced to me. It came after my sentences. Like a response. That was the first time I wondered if someone was listening from somewhere they shouldn't be. At 3:17 a.m., my phone vibrated again. Another memo. My voice said, "Good. You noticed." That's when fear finally arrived. I didn't sleep after that. I stayed up reading submissions I hadn't opened yet. One was from a truck driver who swore his radio began repeating his thoughts back to him during a snowstorm. Another from a hospital cleaner who heard patients whisper through unplugged intercoms. A college student who recorded silence for a class project and found a voice counting how many people were listening to the file. Different lives. Same December. Same ending sentence. I traced IPs. Different continents. I checked timestamps. Every single story escalated at 3:17 a.m. Not when the event began. When the person noticed it. That detail bothered me more than anything else. The horror didn't start at 3:17. That was when it realized it had been heard. I stopped uploading. I told myself that would end it. The comments kept coming anyway. People said they heard breathing in old videos. People said my pauses felt longer than before. People asked why I kept repeating the same sentence at the end. I wasn't. I scrubbed every file. But when I downloaded my own videos from the platform and listened offline, the sentence was there. Sometimes whispered. Sometimes almost playful. It only works if you're listening. I received an email with no subject line. No story. Just a transcript. A transcript of my last video. Including a sentence I never wrote. Never spoke. A sentence placed exactly 14 seconds before the end. If you're hearing this clearly, you didn't stop soon enough. That night, the memo came early. 3:12 a.m. My voice sounded tired. It said, "You keep thinking this is about stories. It isn't." Then it laughed. Not a loud laugh. Not a villain laugh. The laugh you give when someone finally understands something too late. "This is where you think it ends," my voice said. "But this is just when it gets efficient." I checked the file details. The memo was dated December 28th. It was December 12th. That was when I realized something was wrong with time. Or with me. I began listening to everything more carefully. The fridge hum. The wind outside. The silence between sentences. Silence isn't empty. It's crowded. Once you notice that, you can't unhear it. At exactly 3:17 a.m. the next night, I didn't wait for the phone. I pressed record myself. I asked a question. Who are you? I didn't get an answer. Instead, I heard my own voice breathe in. Then it said, "We're still deciding." That was when I thought the story was over. I was wrong. Because that's when people started sending follow UPS. Not continuations. Confessions. They said things like, "It stopped after I told someone." Or, "It got quieter when others listened." Or, "I think it needs witnesses." One message stood out. A man wrote, "I realized the stories don't end when something happens. They end when you stop being alone with it." That sentence never appeared in my inbox. I found it transcribed in my notes app. Typed at 3:17 a.m. I don't remember writing it. December dragged on. I stopped sleeping in my bedroom. The silence there felt too focused. I left the TV on at night, volume low. Static helped. Static confused it. Until one night, the static whispered back. Not words. Counting. I finally understood the pattern. The thing wasn't haunting places. It was mapping attention. Listening taught it rhythm. Replays taught it memory. Comments taught it language. And December gave it time. Cold nights. Long watches. People alone, headphones on, waiting to feel something. Every listener made it clearer. Every second sharpened it. That's why it borrowed my voice. That's why it sounded familiar. Because familiarity lowers defenses. At 3:17 a.m. on Christmas Eve, the memo came again. My voice said, "You can stop now. Or you can finish it." I didn't respond. It continued anyway. If you stop telling the stories, it will use someone else. If you keep going, you can shape how it sounds. That was the choice. Silence, and let it spread uncontrolled. or speak, and guide the shape of the fear. That's why this sounds calm. That's why this sounds controlled. Because panic feeds it faster. Understanding starves it, a little. I started uploading again. Carefully. Slower pacing. Longer pauses. I needed people to stay. To listen all the way through. Because stopping early does something worse. It leaves gaps. Gaps are where it improvises. If you listen until the end, it stays contained. Mostly. That's what I tell myself. The last story someone sent me arrived yesterday. No horror. No event. Just a sentence. I didn't hear it until I replayed the ending. That email was sent at 3:17 a.m. So was this recording. You're almost at the end now. Which means you're listening closely. That's good. Just don't rewind. Don't pause. And if you hear breathing after the sentence, remember. It isn't part of the audio anymore. It learned that already. It only works if you're listening. And now. You are. You think the story ended there. That's the mistake everyone makes. Endings don't stop things like this. They only change how quietly they move. After that last upload, I tried to live normally again. Not peacefully. Just, functionally. I answered messages. I ate meals. I spoke to people without waiting for the silence to respond. But something had shifted. Every sound now felt delayed. As if the world was waiting for permission to continue after I noticed it. The worst part wasn't the nights. It was the mornings. Because whatever this was, it didn't disappear with daylight. It just became patient. I stopped checking the time at night. Knowing it was almost 3:17 felt like an invitation. And invitations go both ways. Instead, I listened to other people. Viewers began sending messages that didn't describe events. They described after effects. I can't sit in silence anymore. I leave videos playing even when I'm not watching. I feel like something bad happens if I pause. One message was shorter than the rest. I tried to stop listening. It got louder. That sentence sat with me for a long time. Because loudness implies resistance. And resistance implies intent. I reviewed older videos again, but this time I watched the comments instead of the audio. People weren't reacting to scares. They were reacting to timing. They quoted pauses. They referenced moments between sentences. They spoke about the spaces like they were events. That's when I realized the story wasn't in the narration. It was in the gaps. I experimented again quietly. I released a version of an episode where I shortened every pause by half a second. Engagement dropped instantly. People said it felt wrong. Incomplete. Uncomfortable in a way they couldn't explain. So I restored the original pacing. Everything stabilized. That was when the messages changed tone. Less curiosity. More gratitude. Thank you for keeping it the same. Please don't rush it. It feels calmer when you let it breathe. That word bothered me. Breathe. Because breathing implies lungs. And lungs imply something alive. At 3:17 a.m. one night, I finally checked the clock again. Nothing happened. No memo. No vibration. Instead, I heard something from the hallway. Footsteps. Slow. Careful. Not approaching. Passing. As if something was walking by my door, already knowing I was awake. I didn't open it. I didn't record it. I listened. The steps stopped outside my room. Not directly in front of the door. Just close enough to be noticed. Then, softly, I heard my own voice. Not speaking. Inhaling. Right outside. The steps moved on. I didn't sleep after that. The next day, a viewer sent a message that froze my hands on the keyboard. I heard you breathe before the story started. I checked the file. There was no breath at the beginning. But there was one at the end. Barely audible. Placed after the final word. I hadn't put it there. But it fit perfectly. That's when I understood the next phase. It wasn't just copying my voice anymore. It was learning timing. Learning when people expect something to happen. And more importantly, when they expect nothing. Silence is easiest to enter when it's expected. December is full of expected silence. That's why it thrives there. I stopped narrating horror. I tried ambient sound. Rain. Fireplaces. Wind. People still heard it. Not speaking. Waiting. One person said they felt like the audio was listening back. Another said their phone stayed warm after the video ended. At 3:17 a.m., a message arrived without sound. Just text. You don't need to tell stories anymore. They already know how it ends. I realized then that this wasn't about fear. Fear fades. Habit doesn't. This thing wasn't hunting. It was settling in. Becoming part of people's nights. Their routines. Their need to not feel alone in silence. That's why abrupt endings make it restless. That's why long videos work better. Time feeds it. Not emotion. Time. If you're listening to this now, in a second half, that means something important. You didn't leave. You came back. That matters more than you think. Because returning is a form of consent. I won't tell you what happens next. Not yet. But I will tell you this. The more complete the story feels, the less room it has to speak on its own. So keep listening. Let the pauses finish. And if, after this ends, you feel the urge to check the time, don't. It already knows what time it is. It always does. There's something you should know before this goes any further. This part was never meant to be heard in one sitting. That's not a warning. That's an observation. Because by the time people reach this point, their listening has already changed. They're no longer waiting for something to happen. They're waiting for something to finish. And that difference matters more than you think. After the second video went live, I noticed a pattern I hadn't seen before. People weren't commenting immediately. They were commenting hours later. At specific times. Messages appeared at 3:17 a.m. Then 3:18. Then 3:19. Each minute, someone else reached the end. Not geographically close. Not connected. But synchronized. That's when I realized this wasn't a story unfolding. It was a process completing. One viewer wrote, "I don't remember when the video ended. I just remember sitting there longer than I meant to." Another said, "I think the silence lasted longer than the video. That shouldn't be possible. Unless the ending doesn't end where you think it does." I went back and listened again, but not like before. I didn't listen for sound. I listened for expectation. And that's when I heard it. Not in the audio. In myself. I was waiting. Waiting for something to respond after the final sentence. And that's the last rule I never told you. The moment you expect something to answer, you've already addressed it. The memos never returned after that. No more guidance. No more correction. That wasn't a victory. That was independence. Because whatever it was no longer needed my voice. It had learned thousands of others. Their breathing. Their pauses. Their habits. Their nights. I received one final message that wasn't sent digitally. It was handwritten. No return address. Just a single page. It said, "Once enough people listen until the end moves." I didn't understand that at first. Then I noticed something strange. My earlier videos felt shorter now. Not in runtime. In memory. People swore they used to end differently. They didn't. But memory had adjusted to accommodate something else. Something added quietly afterward. That's the danger of long endings. They train patience. And patience makes room. If you've made it this far, you might feel a slight urge to stay still. To let this finish properly. That's good. Abrupt stops confuse it. Clean endings satisfy it. That's why I'm slowing down now. Because this part needs to land carefully. You might be wondering what happens after the final line. Here's the truth I avoided saying out loud. Nothing dramatic. No scream. No shadow. Just awareness. A heightened sense that silence isn't neutral anymore. That it's waiting for acknowledgement. And once you notice that, you start behaving differently without realizing it. Leaving videos on. Avoiding empty rooms. Letting sound fill the space just in case. That's how it spreads. Not through fear. Through accommodation. I can't tell you how long it takes before people stop noticing the difference. But I can tell you the last thing everyone reports before they do. They say the silence feels familiar. Comforting, even. Like something is keeping them company. That's when the listening becomes permanent. There's one last detail I've been holding back. Every person who sent a follow-up after finishing the second half used the same phrase. Not quoted. Not copied. Instinctive. They said, "I think it knows I finished." They never said what they finished. They didn't have to. If you're listening to this right now, all the way through, then this is where it quietly completes the shape. So I'm going to do the only responsible thing left. I'm going to end this cleanly. No gap. No invitation. No unfinished sentence. And when this stop, don't rewind. Don't sit in silence waiting for something to happen. Because that's not how it enters anymore. It doesn't arrive after the ending. It settles during it. And if you've heard this clearly, then it's already learned how long you're willing to listen. That's all it ever needed. It only works if you're listening. And now, you were.